That's right. So don't say anything weird. Well, welcome everyone to the Arvada United Methodist Church Arts Adagio class. We're doing this monthly as a part of our music and arts educational series throughout this year. If you haven't had a chance already, you want to make sure to pick up a concert series flyer on your way out. It has all the other list of opportunities, concerts, events that are going to be happening. And I think I'm remembering correctly, Dan, the next one is the United for Ukraine event that will be happening on Saturday, April 2nd at 7 o'clock p.m. So I hope that you and others that you invite might be a part of that. And a special welcome to our live stream audience as well today. We are so glad that you could be with us. You're a part of this experience, and I hope that as you're blessed by this learning opportunity as well, you know that this is a commitment of Arvada United Methodist Church as we grow not only in the wisdom that we corporately share, but in our faith and grace together. A very special thank you to Dan Niebel, who's leading us today. Dan had the privilege of joining us as our keyboardist during the height of COVID. I think we were still outside in the parking lot, weren't we, Dan? What a way to get started. But he just picked up and made it happen and has been such a fun part of our staff team. And if you get a chance to spend some one-on-one time with Dan, you get to know his wonderful humor and his pleasant way of just being a part of this ministry team. Dan has been playing church organ, get this, in a United Methodist church since the 8th grade. Yeah, that's awesome. I think when he introduced himself to us, he said, "I'm on the payroll for Jesus," or something like that. And we are grateful that we get to have not only his keyboarding skills here, but also to learn about all the other gifts he has, primarily with brass instruments and many other instruments that you'll see up here. Dan is currently doing his PhD work at UNC. And we are always the beneficiary of someone who's doing that kind of extended learning and growing, because folks that are in that space bring so much of that wisdom and so much of that inquiry for new ideas into the context of our ministry team together. And so we are really grateful that we have that part of Dan's background to enjoy as well. So he is going to teach us about some things that might be familiar to some of us, and I feel certain when we walk away or when we move away from our live stream camera today, you will have learned something very new and unique about the ministry areas and the music areas that he's a part of. So will you join me in welcoming Dan and thanking him for his time today?
Thank you. So I think when I introduced myself, I actually said that that Jesus has paid my rent for a long time. Maybe not quite as classy as being on the payroll from Jesus. I'll make that change. So today's topic is fairly near and dear to my heart because I'm a brass player mostly by training. And the way brass instruments is very dependent on something called the overtone series. So that is our topic, is the overtone series. It's super nerdy and super awesome. Before we really get into that, we do need to have a little bit of a conversation about basic acoustics. So that's why I've got this lovely whiteboard. Sound is vibrations, and vibrations you can show as waves. So this could be our nice little lovely sound here. Pretend that my drawing is better and these are all even. And that is going to be a big part of how you hear something. So if you're hearing a noise rather than like a musical tone, this just kind of gets really scribbly and all over the place. And it's really hard for your ear to latch onto a pattern. But if you have not noise, it's a regular wave, and that's what your ear detects as a pitch. So there are a couple different things with sound. The first thing is called frequency, so that's how often over time you have a little vibration. And we measure that in hertz. not like the car company, but Hertz. And so the higher the number of frequencies, or how the faster it's vibrating, the higher it sounds to you. So a really low sound is a really long wave. A really high sound is a really quick wave. The next thing we have is amplitude. So the higher the amplitude, the louder your sound. So from here to here, if it's bigger, then that would be a louder sound than, say, from here to here. Excuse my terrible drawing. Our amplitude, or volume, we're going to measure in decibels. I'm sure you are somewhat familiar with those ideas, right? Okay. So if you had two sounds playing the same frequency, pretend there's another sound doing exactly the same thing here, they're going to add onto each other and create a louder sound. If you have two sounds doing close to the same frequency, let's say one is slightly lower, it's going to go in and out of phase like that. And the parts where they're really close together, that's going to be loud. And then when they start canceling each other out, you would sort of have an equalization between, and that would actually make it softer. So if you have two sounds that are almost the same pitch, you're going to end up getting beats, and it's going to sound really weird, and that's what we hear as out of tune. So I'm going to demonstrate that for you with my lovely little tuner here that actually creates a drone for me, and my French horn. So this is the note that I'm going to be playing close to. And I'm going to lip it in and out of tune, and you should be able to hear the beats get faster and slower. So the more out of tune it gets, the faster the beats get, because then they start being out of phase much more, and so you get a lot of really weird lines, basically. And if you ever have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, and I will try to answer them. I'm not an acoustician, so I might not be able to answer everything, but I can at least give you sort of a perspective of what it means as a musician. Okay. So, we're going to talk a little bit about how you hear sounds. Where did my pen go? Okay. And this is a topic called psychoacoustics. So it's basically talking about how biologically your brain understands sounds and what's happening for that to happen. So you have something in your ear that looks vaguely like a snail. And it's lined with a lot of little hairs. Pretend those go everywhere. Now, there's little areas that are in resonance with certain frequencies. So if you have a note that's up here, there's just a little part that is in your ear that knows that that is what that sounds like, and the hairs start vibrating. And when that happens, it sends a signal to your auditory nerve, which then sends a signal to your brain that says, oh, this is the sound we're hearing. This is super, super basic. There's a lot more complex stuff going on. But that's basically how it goes. And so this is on a spectrum, and one end will be really high, one end will be really low, and you just get a bunch of different frequencies in between. So another interesting thing about psychoacoustics, if you have one pitch, your ear can detect really, really, really minute changes. So going from da, you can hear that there's a little bit of a difference, although your ear might still say that that's this note or this is that note slightly sharper. Now, if you have two pitches going on, the difference between those two pitches needs to be a lot larger for you to detect them as two separate notes. And the reason for that is you have little areas. So maybe this hair is the most vibrating. This one is going to vibrate a little bit. This is going to vibrate a little bit. So you've got bigger areas that are vibrating when you're listening. And so this has to be far enough apart for you to hear two different notes. If you have a friend, you can experience this with actually your sense of touch. If you have a pencil and maybe you don't want to be able to watch what's happening, so maybe have them do it like on the back of your arm or something where you're looking away. If you have one pencil moving around on the skin, you can be very, very specific about where that is. If you have two pencils and they start out in the same place, it's going to take a while before you feel two separate points. And that's the same thing that's basically happening in your ears to detect two different sounds. And that's just how nerves work. I don't know why, but that's how they work. Okay. So this brings us to another topic. We're finally getting to overtones. So any sound that you hear, unless it's generated by an electronic device like the ones that you have in your hearing tests, is going to be stimulating lots and lots of different hairs in lots of different places. It's not going to be just one frequency. If you have like your hearing test, that really pure tone that we all love to try to listen for, that's called a really simple wave. It's just one wave and that's it. That doesn't happen in nature, ever. Let's see. And so I want to back up just 1 second. If you were to damage some of the hairs in your ear, that would cause hearing loss. And I'm going to prove to you that you all have high-frequency hearing loss, myself included. I'm going to do this on the organ, so you're not going to necessarily see this. There's one stop that actually plays notes 2 octaves and a fifth above what the normal note is. So this is our normal C on the organ. I'm holding down the same key and changing stops. That's the note that sounds. So it's really, really high frequency stuff. So I want you all to raise your hands, and if you hear a sound, keep your hand up, and when your sound goes away, lower it. So we're going to start here. Do we all hear a really high pitch? And when it goes away, and I'm done. So the older you get, the more likely that you're suffering some sort of high-frequency hearing loss. That's completely normal and completely something that you would expect. Let's see. Hearing loss. Has anyone suffered from tinnitus? One of the reasons why you might suffer from tinnitus is you have hearing loss in a specific area, and your brain has been used to be getting input from those nerves all of your life. And when it stops getting that, it really misses it. And then you start hallucinating that sound. It just starts firing kind of by itself. And that's one of the reasons that you might have some sort of weird hearing things going on. So, there is a reason why we should protect our hearing. And when you do have a hearing loss, it's usually going to just start in one frequency, or it's not going to be like something overall. You know, you're not going to have reduced everything at the same time, unless you have some really sort of strange disease. So if you're trying to, get yourself disability for hearing loss, you have to make sure you only do it in one spectrum. I didn't tell you that. Okay, now on to overtones. So overtones is a pattern of notes that are going to be ringing above the note you're hearing. And that pattern is universal in any sort of tone. And it's based on ratios. In fact, if you know anything about Greek education, ancient Greek education, there were 7 different liberal arts, and they were divided into the quadrivium and the trivium. The trivium was logic, grammar, and rhetoric. So this is the arts of language. And the quadrivium was the arts of quantity pertaining to matter. And the 4 different topics in that were arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. So most of us would probably think music would be more in the arts side of things. But one of the reasons the Greeks put it in the measurement side of things is because of the overtone series. So the overtone series is based on a series of ratios. And one of the best ways to explain that is with a guitar string. So when a guitar string is ringing, the note that you hear, and the one that's the strongest, is vibrating like this. So the whole thing is going up and down. Now a string and pretty much anything can vibrate in more than one way at the same time. So you can also vibrate in half, like that. So this would be a ratio of 2 to 1. It could also vibrate in thirds. Pretend those are even. It could also vibrate in fourths, and so forth. And so anything that is making a sound is actually vibrating in all of those different ways. And your ear is picking up on that. So your ear recognizes this pattern of vibrations that are happening above the note you're hearing. And instead of actually recognizing each of those as individual sounds, it hears it as a whole. The note you hear is usually the lowest note, the fundamental. And then the notes above it determine what we would call the quality of the sound, the timbre of the sound. So this is the way that you know the difference between, say, a clarinet and a flute, or a French horn and a trombone. And the reason why is because with different shapes of instruments, different materials that instruments are made out of, those overtones are going to be vibrating at slightly different amplitudes. So say maybe the second overtone, the next highest one, is really, really present in it. That's going to sound different to you than if it's not there at all. which is pretty cool. It's the same reason why you could probably recognize your mother's voice compared to someone else, even if they're saying the exact same thing. So it's a pretty awesome evolutionary thing that we have going for us, being able to recognize different qualities of sound. One other interesting thing about psychoacoustics and how you hear. You've got two ears, right? So if there's a sound over there, the sound gets to this ear first, and then gets to this ear next. And your brain will recognize that it's the same sounds coming at slightly different time, and then it tells you that the sound you hear is over there because it got to here first. So there's a reason why we have two ears. It helps you know where things are coming from, and if you're about to be attacked by a mountain lion, that's pretty helpful, right? Okay. Right, so I was going to do some demonstrations on a guitar string. The Greeks had an instrument called a monochord, and we're basically going to be kind of doing the same thing with this. All it was one string stretched tight with a certain note, and then you were able to find these different ratios with that string. So this is just an E. If I were to put this in half, I would play this 12th fret up here, and it's going to go up an octave. So this is our fundamental. This would be the next note, if that would be ringing above it. I can also just place my finger over that fret and get something that's called a harmonic. And it's going to be that same really high note. So that is your second harmonic. If I were to find different places on this string that match with, say, the 3-to-1 ratio, the 4-to-1 ratio, I can get higher harmonics as well. I'm not super good at this. You can hear a really high note there. Is different from the one that I'm playing. Let's see if I can get the third. You hear that one? Now, I can't necessarily get those notes on every place on the string. And that's because where I'm touching is something called a node. So halfway through on the string is where a note is. If I were to strum right on top of that node, it's actually going to stop half of the harmonics from sounding. So this is what a normal strum would sound like on that note. This is what strumming on the node sounds like. You hear how it's got a different tone? That's because I've taken out half of the harmonics while I strum there. And it sounds kind of weird. Doesn't sound quite like a guitar, right? Okay. So another idea of acoustics is something called resonance. And anything that is capable of vibrating has a natural resonance. So the natural resonance of that guitar string right now is tuned by how tight it is and then how long it is to the note E. If there was something else in this room that also had the resonance of E, it might start vibrating along with that because I've played that note. So I'm going to show you something interesting on the piano that we're going to see these notes of the, I should explain the harmonic series just a little bit more. So if you see, this is our first note, this is the lowest note. These are the notes that are ringing above it. They get closer together the higher you go. And it's because of the ratios. From here to here, it's 2 to 1. Here to here would be 3 to 1, 4 to 1. And then you also have the ratios between the harmonics. This would be 3 to 2, 4 to 3, 5 to 4. And it gets smaller and smaller intervals. So this first interval is called an octave, and it's such a strong interval, you actually hear them as the same note, just one is higher than the other. And because of that, we divide our scale, and we would label these both as the note C. When you go up to the next one, this sounds a little bit different from this one, and we would label that as G. When you get up here, this also is in a 2 to 1 ratio with your second harmonic and sounds like a C. And as we're getting higher, this is a major third, this is a minor third. Major is larger than minor. The interval from here to here is actually not quite a minor third, and this note doesn't really exist in our scale. But you will hear it when I play the alpine horn. And it's the note where you're like, that one sounds weird. And what we've done in the Western music, is the difference where we hear two tones is approximately a half step. And on a piano, all of the keys are a half step apart. And we've just kind of made all the half steps something that we hear as an interval. And that's how we label our notes. It's not necessarily the best way to do it. It's not the way that all cultures do it, but it's the way that we do it. And it does have some basis in acoustics and sort of the natural laws of physics, actually. Okay, so I'm going to move to the piano, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be hitting this note really hard while holding down this note so that it will ring. But I haven't played this note yet. You can press down the piano key really, really slowly, and it won't actually make a sound. So when I hit this, it's going to make this note vibrate. And I'm going to do that with all of the notes going up to the 8th harmonic. So you should be able to see that hopefully on the screen. So this is our fundamental down here, C. And I'm going to be holding the C an octave above it. We'll put that down slowly. And you should hear a nice ring after I let this one go. You hear that ring? I can do the same thing on the next harmonic, which is this G up here. Oh, and I should probably prove to you that that's the sound that this note plays. So here it is again. We hear that ring. That's that note. Okay, we're going to do the same thing with the next harmonic. This is a G. So this is going to be our third note. You hear there's a ring? That's the note that's ringing. We're going up to the next C. It's ringing there. It's not quite as much, probably because the strings are not as close together. Here's the E. There's a little bit of a ring there. Here's the next G. Not quite as much of a ring. So the further away you're getting from the fundamental, the weaker those harmonics are. So this is the B flat, and there's going to be barely any discernible ring here. And one of the reasons why is because this string is actually not in resonance with the the harmonic, which would be the 7th harmonic, that is being created by this C down here. The next string is, so it's a little bit stronger, still difficult to hear. So now you can actually get pretty much any note. If you hold it down and play a lower note, you'll get some sort of a ring. So I'm going to hold down this D, which is right next to the C I've been playing. And you're going to hear a D 3 octaves above it. That's the note you're hearing. The reason why is because this D up here is the 9th harmonic. So if you see a 9 above on the whiteboard, that's that note. It's the 9th harmonic of this C. It's the 8th harmonic of the D. So you can get harmonics of notes resonating on lower strings. So, kind of strange. Now, if I play the pedal, the right pedal, on the piano, what that does is it allows all of the strings to ring. And then I don't have to be holding any notes down. So when you're using the pedal, which happens most of the time when you're playing piano, you've got all of these different things ringing on different notes. You've got all of these different harmonics going, which gives you really the characteristic sound of the piano. And that's one of the reasons that reproducing that sound digitally is very difficult, because it's changing all the time and ringing all over the place, and trying to keep track of all of those things as a person, programming is really not very easy. Probably the best way to do that is to be just recording individual sounds on the piano and then trying to reproduce them. But those individual sounds in different combinations are going to cause different things to ring. And so it's a super, super complex thing to make actually happen well. Okay. So you are actually capable of making overtones happen and making you hear the overtones when you sing. You might have heard something like Mongolian throat singing, and that's what they're doing. It's helpful to have a drone going along so that you can hear it a little bit better, because they're going to amplify each other if they're in resonance, if I'm singing in tune. So this is a Tibetan singing bowl. You can see I have several of them up here. The larger they are, the lower the sound. I can also make sound by rubbing the rim, kind of like a wine glass. Let's see if I can get that going a little bit better there. While I'm rubbing it, you might hear that it kind of goes wah, 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 wah. So if I don't have really, really equal pressure, it's slightly changing the pitch as I do that. So you hear the wah, 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 wah until I let it go, and then it's a pure sound. Let's compare that one to the next highest one. We hear it's higher when it's smaller, right? Let's go up a little bit higher than that to a really small one. And you heard that weird ring sign there? So, if you're not super great at keeping it equal pressure as you go around, sometimes this will start vibrating a little bit and bounce. and then it makes some of the higher harmonics pop out. So, kind of a cool thing. This one, I don't know if I'll be able to get the rub going. There we go. But we hear the smaller it is, the higher pitch it is, and therefore the faster it's vibrating. We're going to go back to this one, and I'm going to see if I can get some overtones in my voice for you to hear. One of the things we do in English singing, or in Western singing, is we try not to sing on the R sound, because it has a really strange sound. It's not exactly a vowel in our language, but if you do sing on the R sound, you can actually change the inside of your mouth and cause different harmonics to pop out. So I'm going to be singing the note that is the same one that this is playing on basically an R sound, and then getting the different overtones to pop. So you should hear some like really high, weird, whistly things. I'm not super great at that. If you want to check out some really interesting things on YouTube, look up overtone singing. And people will actually sing melodies only with the overtones. And the lower note that I was singing actually doesn't sound super loud. But they've spent a lot more time practicing that than I have. So that's also one of the reasons we don't sing on R, because it completely changes the timbre of the sound and makes it sound not nice and beautiful. So, I want you to imagine a wolf howling, or an elk bugling, or if you've ever lived next door to a husky that is lonely, imagine the sound that they make. That sound is based on the overtone series. They basically are flipping up and down through the overtone series, just like I was doing with my voice. So, I told you you've heard them before, right? Now on to my favorite thing, which is playing a brass instrument. Well, this is not exactly a brass instrument. Normally it would be made out of wood. This one is made out of carbon fiber. This is an alpine horn. Some of you have heard me play this before. And all this is a 12-foot long tube with a little mouthpiece on the top. So when I play my instruments that are brass instruments, or what we define as brass instruments, what I'm doing with my face is I'm making farting noises. So I tell people that I make farting noises with my face for a living, and that's actually true. So I'm buzzing my lips into this mouthpiece, which amplifies it. And then when it goes through the instrument, I am able to play any note on the harmonic series. So I'm able to make it vibrate in a bunch of different ways. If I try to play a note that does not fit into the harmonic series, it doesn't come out at all. It sounds kind of weird and gross. So I'm going to demonstrate what the harmonic series sounds like on this alpine horn. This is 12 feet long, and the tube is a big cone. So one thing I should say, I actually do not play this lowest note. I'm going to be starting on the second one. I would need a larger mouthpiece to play that lower note. So starting on the second note, these are all the notes I can play on an alpine horn. Whew, get my face going, sorry. That's that low note there. You can hear how they gradually get smaller as you go higher. They get closer together. So I was talking to you about the seventh harmonic. We're starting on the second one again. That's the seventh one. It's not really a B flat. It's somewhere between a B flat and an A in what comes out of the horn. And when we started dividing our octave into 12 half steps, that note didn't quite make it. It doesn't quite fit. It's in between. Another note that doesn't quite work is this F sharp, and another note that doesn't quite work is this A. So it's some of the weird odd harmonics don't fit into what we would call our equal temperament system. So when you're tuning a piano, every half step is the same distance apart. When I'm playing an alpine horn, that kind of just goes out the window. It's all about ratios. And sometimes they match up, sometimes they don't. Equal temperament is actually a fairly out of tune way of tuning an instrument, and wasn't something that was done regularly until, well, they weren't actually able to accurately make it equal temperament until electronics came about. So the way we hear notes is actually different than people maybe 150 to 200 years ago. Because of our current tuning system. Yeah?
Is that related to the well-tempered clavier?
Somewhat. So the well-tempered clavier is it's a collection of pieces by Bach. And each piece is written in a different key. So the piece is based on a different note on the piano. And when he wrote that, the way they tuned their instruments was not quite equal temperament. It was close to it, but not quite equal temperament. And each key would actually have a slightly different sound because of the way the instrument was tuned. And all of the intervals were not exactly equal. So they used to say that, like, C major sounded really bright and happy, and then A major had a slightly different feel to it. And it's because of the way that the intervals interacted with each other. They were differently in tune with each other than they were in C major. So tuning systems is like a whole other can of worms that's super interesting, but also like gets a little bit technical. But what we generally have now on pianos and instruments that cannot change pitch is an equal temperament, where every single half step is the same, which means that your fifths are slightly out of tune. It means that your thirds are like really out of tune. And we've just come to accept that that's how it sounds, and that sounds good to us. Musicians probably 150 to 200 years ago might have been like, wow, that's not what I want to hear. So I'm going to play a little piece on the alp horn for you. And this is using all just pure natural harmonics or overtones. One thing I should explain. I'm sort of throwing out the word harmonics, partial, and overtone. They all basically mean the same thing, except for how you number them. If we're talking about harmonics, this is your first harmonic, second, third, fourth, fifth. If we talk about overtones, this is your fundamental, this is your first overtone, second overtone, third overtone. So the numbers change depending on how we're writing about it and labeling it. Not a great system, but it is what it is. Partial and harmonic are basically the same thing. In brass playing, we tend to say partial rather than harmonic. I don't know why, it just is. So this is a little piece. This is called Von der Axelp. So, I want you to try to remember how that just sounded. We're going to take this instrument apart, and instead of it being 12 feet long, we're going to make it about 13 feet long. And what that is going to do is take all those notes I just played and make them lower. So I have to replace this top section with another section that's a little bit longer. So for those of you watching on the live stream, this might be a little bit easier. If you wanted to compare these two, you could rewind and hear me play the same thing in basically two different keys. Those of you here in person, you'll just have to probably trust me that this is a step lower. Okay, but we can see that this is one length longer, right? So this puts this in E flat instead of F, and I'll have to stand back a little bit further to play it. Oh, I should get my little stand on there. That way it doesn't fall over. There we go. So this is the same music that I just played, but it's going to be down a whole step and a little bit lower. It also has a slightly different tone to it. Put this off here to the side. Stay. Okay. So this is the natural horn. Before they invented valves, all of the horns looked like this. So we're going to do a little bit of horn history. Initially, the horn was used as a signaling instrument for fox hunting. So you get the nobles out on their horses saying, let's go be noble and kill some foxes. And you'd have some people along with them to be like, oh, the fox is over here, or we killed the fox, or yay, let's celebrate. And one of the reasons why it would be in a big hoop is because then you could carry it easily. And initially, they would play the instrument without the hand in the bell. And that would be basically the same thing as that, except coiled. And you can play it super loud so it can be heard all the way across, a forest. Well, maybe not all the way across a forest, but we'll pretend. So, initially the horn was more like a let's make noise instrument. Kind of like the trumpet was initially a let's tell people where to go in a war because we're really loud and it can tell you, oh, flank right or attack over here. That type of a thing. Okay. So, the way the horn made its way into doing actual music was through opera. We would have an opera scene with nobles, because opera was for the nobility. And if we're doing that, they like to hunt, so we're going to have a scene with hunters. And it was initially more like a really interesting stage prop. But then, you're making noise and doing these little fanfares and things, and they realized they could make it work with the orchestra. So in the Baroque era, so we're talking around J.S. Bach, Telemann, early 1700s, they started bringing the horn in for doing more than just opera scenes, but usually it would have some sort of context of like outdoors or nobility killing foxes sort of thing. And they started playing mostly in these upper harmonics, because that's where you can actually get something that sounds kind of like a melody. And they actually held the horn up like this. And it was, if they wanted to play with other instruments, you'd either have to have like a bunch of different instruments or a way to make it get longer and shorter. So they invented something called crux. And this one comes apart. We've got a bunch of different tubing lengths. Here's some of the other ones. You see they're all different lengths. And by changing it, you can change what key you're in. So this is putting this horn in the key of F, which was the same as what I was doing the first time around on the Alp horn. It's the same length. This is 12 feet long. And some enterprising or maybe bored horn player in Dresden, or we think it was in Dresden, figured out that if you put the hand in the bell and moved it around, you can actually get more notes than the harmonic series. So I'm going to turn around so you can see this. Move this aside. And if I'm starting out on this harmonic here, there is an F sharp and an F between those two notes, between the E and the G. There's two notes that I can get. And so I'm going to have two different hand positions to get those two notes. If I'm trying to go between this C and E, there are three different notes I can get between those. This is the E, this is the C, So I'm going to gradually close my hand to get an E flat, a D, and a D flat. Now you hear that there's also a change in the sound, right? So it's got some timbre changes as well. It gets more muffled the more covered you get. So the horn still sounds best in the kind of upper range. And this is actually how they played horn for about 150 years, at least in some places. And even though they had invented the valve, so this is a modern French horn. These are my valves here, and my fingers go here. And when I press that, it takes the air and puts it into these other lengths of tubing. So instead of having to change crooks, I have an instantaneous way of making the horn longer, which gives me access to a bunch of different notes. So even though they had invented valves and the ability to do that in about 1815, horn players continued to play this type of instrument all the way up until about 1900 in some places, because they really liked the different sounds you could get, because you could actually be really musical with that. So I'm going to play a demonstration of a piece, and I'm going to do it facing backwards so you can see my hand move around. This is by Vincenzo Bellini, and then arranged by a horn player named Jacques-François Gallet. And this is a romance from one of Bellini's operas, Bianca and Fernando. And I'm able to get a lot more notes than the harmonic series, but the ones that are open and sound the most ringing and beautiful are the ones that are the harmonic series. You'll notice there was one place where I took my hand out of the bell. That was on this harmonic, which is lower than we want to hear it to be. So if you take your hand completely out of the bell, that's as high as you can play that note. You hear how that happens? So don't ask me to explain to you acoustically why this works, because I have no idea. I've tried to find that out, and there's not a quick and easy answer. Because something I'll show you with my regular horn, sometimes we'll add a mute to a regular horn. So this is how the horn sounds just by itself. And we'll stick this cone-shaped wooden thing inside. This is a mute. And it's just going to change the timbre or the color of the instrument. But interestingly, it does not lower the pitch like the hand does. I don't know why. Maybe that should be a good dissertation topic, right? Okay, well, now that we're on to the modern horn, when I don't have any of my valves depressed, it is the exact same length as this horn is right now. So I'll have the same harmonic series available. If I press down my second valve, it's going to be the same harmonic series, a half step lower. If I press down the first valve, it's going to be a half step lower than that. So this is a whole step lower than the first one you heard. If I combine the first and second valves, it takes it down a minor third. Second and third, it's going to be a half step lower than that. And I also have a thumb valve, which allows me to do all of that, but higher. So this would be a fourth up from the first one. And that's actually the fundamental, that low note. The really, really low notes for the other things, I would need a bigger mouthpiece to hit. So basically, with these combinations of valves, I can play 12 of those at once. And then I have all of these harmonics as options, and I just know which notes and what fingerings sound the best in what situation. But that's sort of the physics of how that works. So I'm going to play one short piece for you, and then if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I've probably already gone like super over because I talk a lot. But this is a piece that is not a horn piece, but we're going to make it a horn piece. Oops. And it is by J.S. Bach, and it was originally written for cello. And these are the two minuets from his first cello suite. Does anyone have any questions? Yes. So I have to be buzzing. So the question was, I didn't mention what the part my mouth plays in this instrumentation. So with both the horn and the natural horn, I have to be buzzing the right note or it's not going to come out. So just like the alpine horn, I was doing. So it takes a long time to, get really good at that, which I've been working on for like 25 years. So I do make farting noises with my mouth for a living, but they're like very controlled. Yes? So most of the time when I'm playing French horn, I'm reading out of treble clef. So this top one here. Sometimes we do have some things written in bass clef. A weird and annoying thing about the French horn is it's a transposing instrument. So when I read the note C, the note that is being played on the piano is an F. There's several reasons for that. The first one being it puts the notes on the staff in a place that are easy to read. So I'm not reading a bunch of ledger lines going up and down, which is not as easy to read. For those of you who don't read music, this right here is a ledger line, and it's basically extending the staff down or up. And so if you have a lot of notes that are kind of in this area, and you have to read a lot of ledger lines down, it gets just really difficult to see it well. And the other reason is actually going back to the natural horn. What became the most common crook on the natural horn was the F crook. It had the tone that people liked the most. This is the F crook on this horn. It's this little coil here. If I were to put this one in place of that, it would take it down to an E flat crook. And the way when I read natural horn music, the way I know what I'm supposed to do with my hand is everything is written basically in C. And I know that to get an E flat, I need to shade a little bit. To get a D, I need to shade a little more. To get a D flat, I need to cover all the way. And then it was basically the crook that put it in the key that agreed with whatever group you were playing with. But I would be reading basically these notes and then getting the notes from that in between when I was in an orchestra. And that's probably the biggest reason why the French horn nowadays is pitched in F. Yeah?
Why is it called French horn?
So it really shouldn't be called French horn. I don't know the reason why in the English language we've decided it's the French horn, because it's really more of a German horn. So there's not a good answer for that. The official horn society in the world wants you to call it simply the horn. In German, it would be called the Waldhorn, Wald meaning forest, so the forest horn. In Italian, it's cor, which just basically means horn. And one of the reasons it might be called the French horn is because it helps distinguish from the English horn, which is kind of an oversized oboe. And that one was called English horn, I think, pretty regularly. Or in French, it's called cor anglais, which means English horn. But there's not really a great reason for us calling it French horn. I only call it French horn because that's kind of what people know it as here. If I'm writing a paper or something, it's not French horn. Yes?
As you were being introduced, Amy introduced that you started the organ about 8 years old. So what age were you when you started the French horn? That's question one. And two, was French horn your first instrument that you started
Okay, so that's a few questions. The first instrument I actually started learning was the piano, and I did that in third grade, which that's a really great instrument to learn how to read music on because there's the note, you have to play it. On the French horn, it's like, there's the note, good luck finding it. Same with violin, it's like, there's the note, you kind of put your finger here, let's hope you figure it out. I started playing the French horn when I was in fifth grade, which was in 1995 or 96. I should look at my timeline better. And French horn was my first brass instrument and has been basically my only brass instrument. It is fairly common to start younger people who are smaller on something like a cornet or a trumpet because they're easier to hold when you are, tiny. And then switch to French horn later on in like high school or something like, or middle school. And I actually didn't start playing the organ until 8th grade. I started taking lessons with the organist at my home church when I was growing up. I grew up Catholic, so I did that for 4 years in high school, and then decided to go to Eastman and play the French horn as my living, but I kept taking lessons while I was there. And then started at a Methodist church in Kansas during my master's degree as like my first real job. So starting it with piano and then kind of progressing from there was, for me, a really great way of being able to play music. Being able to read music before I picked up the instrument was, I think, one of the reasons that it came easily to me. Any other questions? Well, in that case, thank you for coming. I hope you learned some weird and new things. And I hope that my explanations were in real English instead of music-ese. And hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.